Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have a look at the latest from the live radar, run through the weather warnings, as we do have a rain warning and a wind warning issued for small areas over the next 2 days, and then we'll have a look at the UKV, look at the precipitation and the temperature as it is turning slowly drier over the course of this weekend and warmer as well with high pressure building in, but it looks likely will only be maybe 2 days of widespread dryness. Perhaps the south and the east can maybe get 3 or 4 with it remaining fairly dry from today onwards, but by Monday, Tuesday next week, low pressure will be running back in off the Atlantic, giving us some unsettled conditions. And also turning us a little bit cooler as well with a fresher Atlantic flow. If we do have a look at the GFS, GM, Eastern OF and the ensembles in the second half of the video, you'll be able to see that it's shaping up to be a very interesting second half of the month. The general theme is for westerlies, average conditions with unsettled weather within that, but we are seeing a hint of a Scandinavian high. Now, I know there's not a lot of weight into this, not many people are speaking about it, but in the latest few model runs, we're seeing all of the three main models trying to build Scandinavian high, trying to pull in easterly winds. None of them come off, so it's not producing anything cold at all, but it's that sort of blocking pattern building in. And if we did see this repeating blocking pattern, I'd be surprised at least one or two of them didn't come off to give some cold weather toward the UK. So a bit of blocking from the main models today. Again, not producing anything for the UK, but a major Scandinavian high potentially building, trying to push colder air into parts of northwestern Europe. And most of the models are avoiding the UK in terms of that colder air. But a very interesting pattern. And of course, these sort of high pressure blocks can be very difficult to model. So we could be seeing a lot of changes within the sort of the 7 to 10 day time frame, as that's roughly when this Scandinavian high looks likely to be building in. So we'll have to see what that is showing in the second half of the video. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. So you start on the live radar, you can see most areas are dry today. There are showers around, especially across parts of northern England, into parts of southern Scotland and the far north and west of Scotland as well, weather front pushing in. Now this weather front is the sort of the boundary between the low pressure in the Atlantic and the high pressure building in. Now, at the moment it's trying to nudge in, but it'll get reversed over the course of the next 24 hours, but slowly moves further away. But where it does sort of stall for a time, that's where we've got rain warnings, because we could drop a lot of rain in a short period of time. But most areas east of this rain band will remain fairly dry for the next 3 or 4 days, being quite decent. Now I'm recording this around 12:30 in the day, so the temperatures you can see are quite mild. Look at that, a lot of yellows on the charts. We have been seeing quite a bit of yellow recently, but a lot more yellow today, especially across parts of Ireland, Scotland. It's just the widespread mild weather. Temperatures widely in the mid-teens, around that 15, 16. Couldn't even rule out nice 18 to 17 degrees over the next couple of days. Again, it all depends on any cloud that could inhibit those temperatures. So we'll have to see what happens, but it is a generally very mild next 3 or 4 days before the Atlantic systems move back in early next week. If you look at the weather warnings, we've got this rain warning across northwestern parts of Scotland from midday today until 3 p.m. tomorrow. Persistent and at times heavy rain may cause some disruption and flooding in places. Again, look at the further details. You could see 40 to 80 millimetres and as much as 100 millimetres and maybe 60 mile per hour winds as well. As that high pressure squeezes the low pressure, dropping a lot of rain over these areas and also giving tighter isobars, so stronger winds. High likelihood, lower end of the impact matrix. So yeah, could be some issues there, but again, it's over generally quite sparsely populated areas, and again over a lot of elevated areas, so it is a very difficult sort of area to forecast, but could be quite a lot of rain. So if you are in these areas, make sure you keep an eye on what's happening, and of course take the necessary precautions if there is any flooding risks. If you look at the Friday warning, you still got that rain warning, and we've got a yellow wind warning across parts of southeastern Scotland from 6 a.m. until 11 a.m. tomorrow. Very strong and gusty winds may lead to some travel disruption during Friday morning. Look at the further details. 60 to 65 mile per hour winds are likely to the east of higher ground. Again, high likelihood, lower end of the impacts. Again, not too severe, but could cause some issues at times. If you go over to the UKV now and have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days, you can see that rain pushing in at the moment, but it does stall, as I said, and then sort of get pushed away from the UK over the course of the next 24 hours. Again, it tries to push in, but just fizzles out. But you can see, for over 24 hours, it is sitting across parts of Western Scotland, Western Northern Ireland, and Western Ireland in general. So it could drop a lot of rain there. Again, it does fizzle out, then move away as the high pressure builds in. And you can see Saturday, Sunday, widely very dry days. For Monday, rain pushes back in from the west, and into Monday and Tuesday, we could start to see more widespread rainfall push in as instability starts pushing from the southwest as low pressure runs in. But it's this high pressure that's building to our east that is going to be just sitting there for the next week or so, and that is building that Scandinavian high in long term that we'll see in the mid-range models in a minute. But you can see this weekend, high pressure building in and a pretty warm upper air temperatures, 10, 12, 13 degrees at 850 HPA. Incredibly warm. That temperatures, those sort of upper air temperatures in the middle of summer would give temperatures in excess of 25, maybe even high as 30 degrees if it was midsummer. So incredibly warm air masses for this time of year. But of course, with the sun being really quite weak, not too long in days, it does mean that those temperatures are not going to rise much above 15, 16, 17 degrees. If you look at those max temperatures, you can see today temperatures rising perhaps to around 13 to 15 degrees, but it's widespread. That's the emphasis on this. It's not just locally in the southeast, it's widely from the north of Scotland, 14, 15 degrees, all the way down to parts of southern England, 14, 15 degrees. If you look at Friday temperatures, you can see overnight doesn't drop much below the low teens, and into Friday afternoon you can see temperatures as high as 16 or 17, and once again, apart from the far west where we've got that precipitation, it is widely in the mid-teens. Into Saturday, temperatures are not too bad overnight, maybe high single digits, coldest conditions, and then widely once again mid to high teens, maybe slightly cooler across the north with a bit of thicker cloud around, but it still is dry, and to the south of that, 16, 17 degrees, really quite mild. And into Sunday, again, widely mid-teens, maybe peaking at 16, 17, and into Monday as well. Slightly cooler overnight, mid-single digits, and cooler in the day, maybe 10 or 12 degrees. So we start to push the instability in. Fresh air masses, more cloud. So Monday could be a bit of a cool down. And I'm not going to lie, next week, I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't get much above 10, 11, 12 degrees, which looks likely to be the low temperature across the next couple of days. So yeah, turning much cooler next week. Nothing incredibly cold, but much cooler compared to what we have at the moment and what we have over the next couple of days. So it could come a little bit of a shock to the system, but again, it's not too much. It's not differing too much from average for this time of year. If we do now have a look at the GFS and see what that is doing, and of course keep an eye on that Scandinavian high. If we do run through, you can see the high pressure building at the moment, southerly wind bringing that very warm air mass in, and then low pressure running in off the Atlantic. But you can see that high pressure that pushed in is now sitting up towards Scandinavia by the middle of next week. Now you can see generally the flow is westerly here, but look out across Eastern Europe and Russia. We've got an easterly wind developing, and it's heading straight for the UK. Look for the upper air temperatures. Minus 10 isotherm in there. Look at the potential equivalent temperatures. You can see that air mass even better, heading straight for the UK. However, if we run it on, you see that easterly wind never makes it to the UK. The westerly flow holds on, and that easterly sort of gets wrapped around the higher pressure, gets to Scandinavia, maybe Denmark, and then pushes back up northwards. So we're on the cusp of an easterly here, but the GFS doesn't come off. Neither is GM, neither is ECMWF, or any of the ensemble members apart from the odd one or two. So the model consensus is this high pressure to build in, cold easterlies to develop for parts of Europe, but not make its way to the UK. But we've got to keep an eye on it, because this has only significantly developed in this sort of cold air mass getting our way within the last day or two. So it could, a small chance, but it could develop into more of a sustained easterly, and if it did, then we could see colder air. Again, you wouldn't expect anything much colder than sort of the minus 5 isotherm this time of year, but it could be cold enough to produce much colder than average conditions, frosts, and chilly conditions, maybe some snow over higher ground. But beyond that, that easterly just gets pushed away, and you can see generally we keep a bit of a southeasterly flow, but generally nothing too cold. But it's this recurring theme in the longer term, beyond 300 hours, for high pressure trying to build to the north, trying to build towards Scandinavia and Svalbard, the Arctic, but low pressure towards Greenland and northern Canada, trying to push it away with the jet stream. So a bit of a battleground going on here between high pressure towards Scandinavia and lower pressure out in the North Atlantic. So we'll have to see what happens, but it's very, very interesting today what is going to be happening that. And if we do run it back and have a look at the air masses, see how close we do get to that cold air mass, you could see the -5 line is just off the coast of eastern Scotland. The -10s over Scandinavia and potentially into parts of Denmark. Look at the temperature deviation, very cold. Again, not that cold for this time of year across parts of Denmark and Scandinavia, but if it did head towards the UK, it would be incredibly cold. Look at the potential equivalent temperature. Look at all that cold air to the east, trying to push in, again, with very low dew points. Look at all those cold dew points, down to -10 in some areas heading towards the UK, but it never quite makes it. For the UK, generally is a cooler westerly flow. If we do look at the GEM, see how that does compare out to day 10. Again, high pressure building in at the moment, low pressure running in off the Atlantic, going quite unsettled. Could be even quite stormy there with the lows. And again, look at the Scandinavian high, trying to pull in an easterly wind in, feeding into these lows. If we do run it on all the way to day 10, you can see that easterly is trying to come in. But once again, doesn't get much further than Scandinavia and Denmark because the lower pressure is holding it at bay. And at day 10, the high pressure starts to migrate more towards Siberia and Russia. And generally that easterly gets cut off and go more as a westerly flow. So on the cusp of quite a cold pattern here, but it doesn't quite come off. Not on the GFS, neither GM, and you see the eastern WF doesn't come off either. If we do look at those air masses, you can see easterly wind, cold air trying to push it into parts of Scandinavia. The -10 isotherms there, quite a cold pool of air, but it never quite reaches the UK. And again, you can see even better by looking at the temperature deviation, this cold pool here. Again, not ridiculously cold for that area, but if it did go to the UK, that would be 10 degrees, probably below average. So yeah, we think very interesting pattern here. Again, nothing ridiculous, but if it did come off, it would be very cold, but we're not seeing anything like that at the moment. We've just got to keep an eye on it, and as I said, it's more of an interesting pattern if we do see this recurring Scandinavian high over the next few weeks into December, because at some point it could come off, and if it did come off to December, when air masses are slightly colder, that high pressure block is more established, then it could produce something more significant at the time. For the time being, it's just hints and something interesting that we're seeing. It's at least something different from the norm, which is of westerly flow. And definitely is sort of reassuring the winter look ahead to what we did see blocking to our north. So if you now have a look at the ECMWF, see how that does compare over the next 10 days, you can see the high pressure building in at the moment, low pressure trying to run underneath it, and you can see the Scandinavian high building in once again. Bit of an easterly there once again, but not getting towards the UK, again like the GEM and the ECMWF. You put in the upper air temperatures, and you can see less of a colder pool there, but still enough to produce something much colder towards the end of November. But you can see once again we are still in that westerly flow. But again, similar to both previous model runs, we've got higher pressure up towards Scandinavia, easterly winds developing across parts of Eastern Europe, and a much colder pool of air there. So it is something to keep an eye on toward the last week of November. If it did come off, we would be going significantly cold, and good 10 to 15 degrees colder than it is now. But you can see the massive blob of blues and purples up towards northern Canada and Greenland, and that's going to prohibit any development and any easterly winds. It's going to be a real battleground. But of course, if we did get the sort of perfect storm scenario, the easterly wind colliding with the westerly flow over the top of the UK, that's where you can get huge snowfalls. So we'll have to see if that does happen into the last week of November and early December. But if that were to happen, we'd have to see a much colder pool develop, and it's sort of become established over the UK for a few days at least. So that is something to keep an eye on the longer term. But for the time being, a westerly flow looks the most likely situation. Just got to keep an eye on our east on the developments there. We can see this well represented by going on to the ensembles, and you can see nothing majorly cold in the longer term towards the last sort of 2 weeks of November. Again, most of the ensemble members back down towards average, a few going quite cold, some going quite mild, but very unsettled. So that westerly flow looks pretty established, but again, it's just depending on that higher pressure to the northeast to see if it does develop. And again, if we did see something like that, we'd start to see a shift down in these ensemble members, start to see more of them get towards that -5 region, and then we'll have to see if that does come off. But that is something sort of the 14-day time frame, nothing imminently possible. You can see in the next sort of 5 days it's incredibly mild, 5 to 10 degrees above average for the time of year, and yeah, very little precipitation, at least in the next 4 days, before it all ramps up again next week. And again, you can look at the dew points. That's another good emphasis on the direction of the air mass. At the moment, it's around 10 degrees, but by next week, into the last 10 days of November as well, more down towards 2, 3, 4, showing not only a cooler air mass, but potentially some of these getting towards freezing, shows more of a continental Arctic air mass, which could be symbolic of that easterly air mass pushing in, potentially. Again, it's something to keep an eye on. You can see the GFS operational run there, well down towards freezing, so showing much colder air masses, lower dew points, drier, colder air, and it could mean some widespread frost towards the end of the month. But again, we are just keeping an eye on all the different things. Anyone saying it's completely westerly towards the end of the month could be right, but I do think there's more to it at this stage, and we've just got to keep an eye on what the developments are over the next week or so. And again, look at the 2 meter temperatures. You can see over the next couple of days it's up to 15, 16, 17 degrees, but come next week it's unlikely to be getting much above 10 or 11. And some areas under cloud, under a bit of rain, maybe only 7 or 8, and the overnight lows will be much lower as well. You can see at the moment overnight lows are around 10 degrees, but by next week we'll be down to sort of 3, 4, 5 degrees, perhaps even colder in some areas. And again, accompanied by the big precipitation and stronger winds, a lot of cloud, it will feel colder than that. So much more autumnal feel next week, a much cooler feel, back towards average, perhaps potentially even feeling quite cold as well, even though on the thermometer it's not too bad. And of course, in the longer term, we've got to keep an eye on what's happening towards Scandinavia and to our east, as that could develop into something more significant right towards the end of the month into the start of December. As I said, we've been seeing this recurring theme on the winter look aheads of that high pressure build to our north, and again, we're starting to see hints of it in these models, but we've got to see it within the 7 or 10 day time frame and sort of concrete with ensemble support, and then we can really start to talk about it. But at the moment it's just hints, and for the time being a westerly flow looks the most likely. So anyway, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.